Well, good morning. Welcome to today's webinar, What Use is Technological History for Future Projections? I'm very pleased to be moderating the session with you today and to welcome Adrian Murphy from Archives of IT, who will be our keynote speaker today. You'll probably know me. I'm Mike Wardle. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at ZN. My job very much today is to moderate the session and to introduce. The program today is quite simple. I'll keep my introductions as short as I can, and then we'll move on to the keynote presentation from Adrian before we take Q&A towards the end of the session. For those of you who haven't used GoToWebinar before, the way in which we manage the questions for the session is that on your screen you'll find a questions tab. You can write in your observations, your questions, your comments at any point during the webinar, and we'll pick those up and manage them during the Q&A session. And please do put your put your question in when you think of it, rather than waiting until the end, just so we don't lose issues as they come up. The session is being recorded today, so if you want to go back and rewatch some of the content, or if you have friends and colleagues who you think might be interested, the recording will be posted on our website in around 24 hours time. So that's available to you, and we'll email out to remind you of that after the event. Finally, just to say, if you do put a question in for Adrian, we will put you in touch afterwards in terms of sharing your email address with Adrian. So if there's any need for any follow-up discussion, that can be made easier. So I think that's all for me by way of introduction. Just now to, first of all, thank our sponsors. We're very fortunate at the FS Club to be supported by a whole range of organisations who enable us to run this webinar series and range quite widely across science, technology, finance and economics. And just remains now for me to introduce Adrian Murphy, the PR and Communications Manager at the Archives of IT. Adrian, really looking forward to your presentation. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Mike. Hello, everybody. Good morning. First of all, I'd like to apologise for our Director of AIT, Tom Abram's absence. He's unwell, so he can't make it today. And I've been with AIT for 18 months and working closely with Tom, so I'm hoping I can instill his enthusiasm in this presentation. So to begin with, I'll give a little quote and just talk through what this presentation is going to be about, and an introduction to the Archives of IT. So first of all, setting the scene, learning from history. In 1948, Winston Churchill pointed out to the House of Commons that those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. He was, in fact, paraphrasing from George Santayana from his book The Life of Reason, published in 1905, who noted that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So the questions today are, does the history of IT, the IT industry to date, offer lessons for the future? If so, what can we learn? And the stimuli for this discussion are thoughts from interviews in the Archives of IT, but we hope afterwards that you can add other ideas and conclusions when you've heard and from what I've got to say, and also some video clips that I'm going to show you. So next slide, please. So what is the Archives of IT? Well, AIT is a registered charity founded in 2015 by Roger Graham, OBE, to record, raise awareness of and encourage the study of information technology and how it has changed our lives. Archives of IT is a free-to-use and expanding online resource of interviews from leading people associated primarily with the UK IT and telecommunications industry. The online resource also includes teaching resources, in-depth features, research, digital exhibitions, and donated publications. Next slide, please. So our tagline is capturing the past and inspiring the future. And the emphasis is on oral history, the oral history of personalities and their background, successes and challenges. We accept this, we capture this through video and audio interviews and complement them with in-depth features and research projects, as well as company reports and other media. So AIT is distinctive in concentrating on the personal views, ideas, experiences of those who have built and worked in this important activity, while other archives and museums tend to be focused on preserving physical devices and working machines, and also have a physical space to go into. So we're very much digital and very much online. Next slide, please. So building on the interviews and the web content, to date we have just over 250 interviews, and they include scientists, engineers, and entrepreneurs. We also have publications. We have a collection of industry publications that have been kindly shared by archives of IT interviewees, and they include weekly and monthly periodicals, annual reports, research documents, and in-depth analysis dating back to 1972. We also have research, and one of our key aims is to encourage academics and students to use this free archive for their research into IT. We also commission research projects such as our History of Human-Computer Interaction, which was published in September 2023 and is available on the website. We also have news, features and blogs, short industry news stories and more in-depth features on topics reflecting our interviewees' specialisms. E.g., recently those have included AI and supercomputers, and also a history of the internet, and also 40 years of mobile telephones. Next slide, please. So here you can see on this slide one of the sections on our website, which we have distilled some of the many interviews that we have into themes, and these include current developments. So some of the features that I've just mentioned, so the human-computer interaction feature, history of the internet, mobile phones, and we've also got a section on tech for good, and the network society, and iconic companies. Next slide, please. So what can we learn? Among the 250 interviews, there are 400 hours of chat, 30,000 pages of text, and it can be quite difficult to distill a winning formula for tech business. But there are some recurring themes that help. Next slide, please. So the first thing to pick up is that we can see from the archive that the UK tech sector is a winner. The UK tech industry is a success story. It's better to be in the UK tech industry than not in the tech industry. It's a great place to do business, and it has been since Leo was the first commercially stored program digital computer established in 1951. Centres of Excellence led global innovations, and these came from Manchester and Cambridge universities in particular, and they developed early computers. There's UCL and the Post Office, which led the internet and mobile technologies. The Silicon Fen has grown some great oaks from acorn, such as the semiconductors from ARM. And we have a huge community of tech industry that fuels other businesses. And also, London is one of the best places in the world for inward investment in tech. Next slide, please. The markets undervalue growth. For example, in the next two clips that we're going to see, one of which is an interview with Sir Martin Reed, CEO of Logica, on shareholder attitudes and valuations, and John Higgins in his role as at Digital Europe. They say that UK shareholders don't have an appetite to grow an Apple or a Google. Maybe that's because the European market is fragmented. Next slide, please.
Well, you know, Tom, what really drove me as chief executive of was I really wanted Britain to have world class significant listed business. And that really I think was the big thing for me. And so I was quite sad when Logica got taken over after I left. And I do actually have a level of discomfort on the number of UK listed businesses that have been brought up over the years. I've been on the boards of several of them, Boots, Asda, Invensys, Laird, where I was chairman. And I think we do have something of a problem in that few investors today are willing to take a long-term view. Now, that's a problem, I think, generally, but I do think it's especially so here in the UK. There really is a problem, in my view, about investors not valuing companies properly. For example, when I was on the board of Invensys, we sold a third of the business, that was the rail business, to Siemens for the whole value of the company. So it does raise some pretty big questions in my mind, and I can't help but feel that this puts us at a bit of a disadvantage here in the UK.
And if you can play the next slide, Sasha, of John Higgins, CVE.
Europe is saying why been in industry, just done what you've described. And when you dig under the surface, I mean obviously there are a number of reasons, but if you had to pick out one reason above all others, to me it is to do with the fact that Europe is not one market. And people will tell you that the huge advantage that the American companies have is one big English-speaking market that they grow quickly in, and then because they've grown quickly and because they're English-speaking, they quickly move into other markets.
Next slide, please. But unicorns are valuable, so you don't have to have a giant market capitalization to be successful. In 2022, the UK became just the third country in the world to have a tech sector valued at $1 trillion, with more unicorn billion-dollar tech startups being created than Germany, France, and Sweden combined. Next slide, please. So, don't rely on predicting the future. As Niels Bohr, the Danish physicist, said, it's difficult to make predictions, especially when they relate to the future. We asked Professors Lord Mayor Michael Manelli and Jim Norton to look back at the Butler-Cox reports, which were donated to our archive from 30 years ago, and see how good we are at advising CIOs on industry trends. Industry experts got some big issues right, but totally underestimated the impact of the development of the internet, for example. They spotted the demand for video data services, but not how they would be delivered, such as to mobile telephones. The moral is, don't bet the bank on one idea of future technology. Next slide, please. And also, one big factor that we've learned from the archive is that failure is a key stage in success. So multiple entrepreneurs, including Tom Alube, Andy Phillips, Richard Little, contrast attitudes to failure in the USA and the UK. Andy Phillips, for example, Active Hotels and Booking.com, learned that what the market wanted with the first abortive attempt, selling hotel rooms to the American audience. He realised that US tourists really only visited London, Oxford and Cambridge, while Active Hotels was selling rooms in Blackpool, Scunthorpe and places farther afield, for example. But it worked out, and he described the best acquisition. This was the best acquisition in internet history and is believed to be the most profitable ever in the digital travel market. Today, Booking.com's market cap exceeds $50 billion, employs over 10,000 people, and processes $100 billion of bookings in 220 countries. Here's a clip from Tom Alube's interview with Archives of IT on the importance of failure towards success. Next slide, please.
Why are we in this country? Why are we not able to build Microsoft, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook? We, apart from ARM, we never get there, do we?
Yeah. I mean, reasons. One of them, well, two that I would probably point to, maybe, possibly three. One is our relationship with failure. We don't really like and embrace failure in the way that the folk in the States do. You know, you talk to an entrepreneur in the States and you say, tell me about your businesses, and they'll say, oh yeah, no, I launched one and then it crashed and burnt, and then I launched another and then it crashed and burnt, but this third one is going really well. You talk to an entrepreneur in the UK, getting them to say, you know, I tried this and it didn't work or whatever, or even in people's careers, getting people to say, you know, I joined a company and it didn't work out, or, you know, we just don't like to talk about it. But you've got, as entrepreneurs, we know that the route to success is through a series of failures. The reason why I got my first job at British Airways was because I applied to 500 other companies and they all said, get lost, we don't want you.
Sorry about that. So next slide, please. So something we can ascertain from this is getting things right the first time might not be the ultimate aim, but getting things right the second time could be. Richard Little from Braid and CenturyTech says, my route to success was having got everything wrong first time, and then my philosophy became to get it right second time, not even to worry about getting it right first time. We launched Braid with the wrong product, but we got it right when we discovered what was wrong with it. This has been almost the background to agile programming. You iterate. Nowadays, it's become much more systemized, but in those days, it seemed like I was inventing this. So what he says then is, don't over-research things, get out, do it, get it wrong, but correct it. Next slide, please.
So we chose Tele having failed with our first idea. And in fact, this conversation reminded me of a lecture after I sold Braid, when someone asked me to explain, you know, my route to success. And it was having got everything wrong first time, and how my philosophy was to get it right second time. Not even worry about getting it right first time. So I joined Burroughs, and if I'd stayed as a salaryman, I would have moved to IBM later. It was the wrong company when I was given IBM or Burroughs to choose between. We launched Braid with the wrong product, but we got it right when we discovered what was wrong with it. And that's become, almost the background to agile programming. You iterate. Nowadays, it's become much more systematized. But in those days, it seemed like I was inventing this. Don't over-research things. Get out, do it, get it wrong, correct it.
Next slide, please. So you have to be in the game. Andy Phillips, again, asked about his success rate, said, it's almost exactly what the industry statistics would suggest it is, which is deeply depressing because I always hope that I'm better than everybody else and that I can go in and make investment more intelligently. The cliche is always that angel investing is a power law game and all your returns are made from 2 or 3 investments out of 50. In material terms, it's probably slightly more than that, but really not very much more. But I probably have 50% or so that have or will go bust, another 30% that will survive, and then all the returns come from 20, 10, 5% long tail, which make really disproportionate returns. Next slide, please. So who did it? Historian Dr. Sam Blackstone from UCL London looked at the post-war generation that founded the industry. He wrote a report in June 2021 from his research from the archives of IT, and this is what he had to say. What is so striking about the development of the IT sector, and more specifically, those that led this proliferation in the early post-war decades, is that, on the whole, they were not rooted in one of the higher social classes. Unlike so many aspects of public life, the business world, law, the civil service, politics, and academia in this period, which remained stubbornly connected to the established group of more middle-class individuals, the IT sector was very different. Its newness and the fresh thinking and talent it required meant it drew in people whose fundamental qualities were intelligence and innovation, something that not related to social class. In other words, it was close to a meritocracy. Next slide, please. So what about the women in IT? An enigma, numerically and influentially important in the early days. Characters such as Mary Berners-Lee, Grace Hopper, Katherine Johnson, Karen Sparrow-Jones, but then it declined in numbers, discriminated against, but hugely important in their contribution to the industry. Steve Shirley and successor Hilary Cropper, and also people like Vin Muria, who is a serial creator of tech unicorns. Asked if the high proportions of men in IT even put her off, Vin says, if I'm brutally honest, I never took any notice of it. I was so focused, I had no idea that it was an issue. Looking back on it, it was probably at the time a massive advantage. On the third day of work at Kuhl, Vin was told that she would not be successful because there were 3 things wrong with her. She was Asian, young, and female. She says, whenever I meet that person now, I say, guess what? I've fixed one of those. I'm not so young anymore. Here's a clip from Vin Muria now. Next slide, please.
How has the kind of very high ratio men to women in the industry sort of had an impact on your career?
If I'm brutally, never took any note. I mean, I was so focused. To be quite frank, I had an idea that it was an issue. I know that, and in fact, looking back on it, it was probably at the time a massive advantage, because here I was as an Asian young female who, I mean, although I was told at third day into my office, my work at Keywell, there were 3 things wrong with me, and that's why I'd never make it. And I said, well, what are they? And I thought, God, I've only been here 3 days, and you found 3 things wrong with me. What's going to happen next? And they said, you're Asian, young, and you're female. Okay. And
Who
I said,
said that? Sorry.
I won't tell you that because it would be awful to say it, but I won't give you the name, but somebody quite high profile. And I remember saying to them, well, whenever I meet them now, I said, guess what? I fixed one of those. I'm not so young anymore. But the reality is, I never thought of that as my chip. That was their problem. And to me, looking back on it, those same characteristics, because I bothered to understand the industry and to come across with domain expertise and to understand my piece, so that when I spoke to somebody, it was with professionalism and with clarity and understanding of their business, that became a major asset because people never forgot you.
Sorry about that. Next slide, please. So the conclusion, the UK sector is a great place to do business, invest and make money, but don't expect to get it right first time. Stick with it if you want to get successful and potentially rich. It's a game of chance. Spread your bets if you're an investor, or be prepared to fail more than once if you're an entrepreneur. Success is about what you know and desire to win, without regard to gender, social class, or ethnicity. So, what is your formula to success? Next slide, please. So, just to finish up, if anybody in the audience would like to get involved in ART, you can help in many ways. You can help us to learn more about the industry by being interviewed or by sharing any documents or collections that you have from companies that you've worked with. You can write a thought piece or a blog to lead the discussion, or you or anybody you know could volunteer time to transcribe an interview or help with digital curation, or you can donate funds. But if none of those things appeal to you, you could sign up to our newsletter if you aren't already, and follow us on social media. And that's all. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Adrian. A kind of whistle-stop tour around some of the history of IT and the archive. Just starting off, I wonder whether we can distill or learn what makes a successful tech entrepreneur. We've heard some specific examples, and so the question is either what makes an entrepreneur, or I guess who are the most successful innovators of the last 70 years, based on the research which the archive has done.
So, I guess in terms of successes, one of the standout successes is the ARM company. So the microchips that they produce are now in, I think it's 98% of smartphones around the world. So they're continually innovating to try and keep up with the next generation, and that was simply by some of those examples or some of those words and phrases that we heard in that presentation, was that they didn't necessarily get that right first time. It was just by a process of elimination that they came up with a technique where their semiconductors were light, they lasted longer than others, and they led from that success. And before that, they were making computers and other tech as well. So in some ways, because they were out there doing so many things, they stumbled on a winning formula. So they weren't without their failures, but certainly now that company is one of the most successful tech companies ever to come out of the UK. And I think also, I think what Vin Muria was saying then. So I think Dame Stephanie Shirley, or Steve Shirley, as she called herself, she had to send letters out to people with the name Steve just to get recognised. So I suppose you have to overcome adversity, and you have to overcome some pretty difficult circumstances also to push through and get to be successful. So I guess it's also a case of your determination. But then what Tom Alubi was saying was that we probably should in the UK have a better outlook on how people talk about their failures, or I suppose going back a stage further, people should talk about their failures more and make it more acceptable and more of a conversation. I think he was alluding to the US, and the fact that that's probably how they approach things, is that they can talk about it and they can share their experiences. So if we're not sharing our experiences of failure, then people might give up at the first hurdle because it's just too much to tackle or take on and push through and go for a second try and get it right. Then I'm sure you can get it right third time or fourth time as well. I don't think it necessarily has to be the second time. So there's a few things there. People just powering on and getting through it, but also you'll go through the archives of IT and people have learned certain skills, and they've learned from their peers and their competitors as well. So it's not just about luck or chance or um, coming up with ideas. You have to have a bit of technical know-how as well. And I think one of the things through the archives is that with the UK, we never seem, once we've got a great idea or a great product, we never seem to know how to sell that on or to get to the market, so to speak. We sometimes leave that to other people or sell the companies on.
Thank you very much. Christine Arrowsmith has made a comment, really, but one that you might want to pick up on. She's commented that one factor not picked up on so far is the kind of north-south divide in the UK. It was a woman who discovered the idea of computers by reading a book. As a 10-year-old, the attitude in the northeast of England was very much against women. Christine says she got her start by coming south. This is another aspect, I guess, of the cultural placing of technology, and just wonder whether you have any thoughts about the geography of technology and entrepreneurship.
I think the geography perhaps mattered more in the early days of the tech industry and the development of computerization, as you needed to be, perhaps in the Manchesters or the Cambridge setups, to be part of pioneering developments. But a lot of universities have stepped up and are doing great things. And some of the entrepreneurs that have been featured in the archives of IT talk about the setup that we have in the 21st century, and especially post-pandemic, where, and here we are now on a webinar talking over video, if you've got a laptop and a phone, you can pretty much set up a business from anywhere, and you can be part of any organization or any movement from your home or anywhere you wish to be. So in some respects, geography isn't as important as it once was, but there'll always be more tech startups in London than there will be in anywhere else in the country. So yes, it's a factor, but there could be an argument to say that these days less so.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, Adrian. Shane Drinian has asked whether it will be true to say that UK talent is being poached by the US tech industry. Do you see signs of that, and do you think there are any remedies to that?
Yes, people are being poached, and they've been poached over the past 4 or 5 decades as well. Quite a few of the people interviewed in the Archives of IT have ventured over and worked in the US. And on the flip side of that, there are quite a few people that have come from the States over to the UK to work as well. There's some people that have been poached from the UK, haven't gone over to work in the US simply because it didn't suit them, their circumstances at the time. And I think people will always be poached because I think perhaps there'll be a money factor, and there'll also be the interest of broadening their own experiences and trying to find some kind of success abroad. Is there a way of remedying that? I'm not sure whether it's just about money, but I think it is about the opportunities that people have in the UK, whether they match up to the US. So I think this goes back to the argument in the presentation, and it's talked about a lot in the archive, is that there are very exciting companies in the US that really do stand out. So the Googles and some of the AI companies that are coming out. So I think it'll always be a challenge. However, the UK is now got so many startups, and we've got so many unicorns ourselves, and if you can, as I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, if you compare the UK to other countries in the EU, for example, we are still punching perhaps above our weight. So sometimes it's a matter of choice, but yeah, I think people will always be poached, and I think the US will always be an attractive place to spend a few years to gain experience and knowledge as well.
Thanks very much. Karol Szynski has kind of followed up on the question about geography, asking whether there's a separate story to tell about Scotland and sort of Silicon Glen, and then the M4 cluster going down the motorway towards Wales. And perhaps some thoughts on that, but also is there perhaps a research project there for the archive in terms of really exploring the geography of IT development in the UK?
I think you've got a very good point, and I think expanding the archives is something that we've been doing continuously. So there are areas. I think, yeah, going back to the previous question as well, looking at the archive, there does need to be more interviewees from Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland as well, and Ireland. So I've made a note of that, and that's something I'll be taking on board. And if you have any recommendations, or if you're a person that indeed feels that you have something important to offer in terms of being an interviewee, or any other research that you think we should be looking at, then please email me after the webinar.
Thank you very much. An open invitation. If you have ideas as to people who the archive ought to be interviewing and engaging with, please do get in touch with Adrian and his colleagues. And also, just to reiterate Adrian's invitation, that if you have archives of materials that you've picked up in your career and you think they might be of interest to the archive of IT, that invitation is very real, I'm sure. A question I've been thinking about is, are there equivalents to the archive of IT in some of the other jurisdictions and markets? In other words, is this something, this oral history approach, is this something which is being done, as far as you know, in other parts of the world, particularly perhaps in the US, where we know there's an awful lot of activity that's taken place?
I don't know of an exact replica anywhere in the world. I know that, for example, if we look at the Science Museum, they curate a lot of their objects into digital exhibitions, which is something that we tried to do with our timelines and our features. But I don't know of an archive of what we have is 250 plus interviews now, which are a mixture of in-person videos where we'll go, not so many of those, but mostly now over Zoom or Teams or some other video platform. So it's a good question. I should research that more, but from what I know, there's nothing that you could go onto in America and find, let's say, 500 interviews spanning 7 decades of tech.
Maybe you'll set up the US branch of Archive IT as a spin-off. Shane Drinians asked, talking about Tom Alubi in his interview, talking about the fear of failure and fear of discussing failure in the UK. Is there anything we've learnt from the archive about how we can inculcate the kind of move fast and break things attitude that the US seems to have in spades, but bring that into the UK tech industry?
There are many people interviewed recently that do mention through their career and also through their education. So there's people that haven't necessarily flown through their education or been successful in their first jobs. I think it was John Higgins, or no, Richard Little there, who was saying that he perhaps should have gone with IBM rather than stay at another company. So what are the lessons from the archive? I think it's what I was referring to previously, is that I suppose now there's more entrepreneurs than ever before, and the younger ones are more prepared to talk about how they got into it and what they've worked on and what was successful and what wasn't successful. There might be some blame for that on somebody else, or they might take the blame themselves and spread some knowledge to other people. So I definitely think that's what it's all about, is talking about it more, conversing about it more, as if it's same as the successes that we have, and because all you're doing really is you're imparting your experience, whether it's good or bad, onto other people. It's always more difficult when you think of companies. I don't think many companies are going to necessarily write a report or share the details of their failures, but the more of that as well would be better.
Well, thank you very much. We're just about coming to the end of the session, and your last comment reminds me of the American private company, Milliken, where at every level of management, the only thing that managers are allowed to bring to the table is the mistakes they've made and what they did to put them right, as a learning organization kind of approach. We have reached the end of time. Just say, first of all, a thank you to our sponsors. I mentioned before that we are very fortunate to have the support of these organizations and people who enable us to run this series of webinars. We have a number of other events coming up tomorrow, like a Duck to Water, Empowering Diverse and Creative Thinking for London's Future Success, launch of the Smart Centres Index 9 tomorrow as well, and also on Friday, The City, Resilient Against the Global Terror Threat. So plenty of good content coming up. Do keep an eye out on the website for future events. Just remains for me to thank you, the audience, for your attendance and your attention and your engagement today, and to thank Adrian for a really wonderful presentation of the work of the Archive of IT. And do send a message to Tom to get better soon. And we look forward to hearing more about the archive and its work in the future. So thank you very much. We'll see you next time. Thank you.